I'm Kristen Matson. I'm the director of Creative Sonoma, and I'm familiar with and work with everybody on the call except Cassandra. You're a newcomer to me, so welcome. Glad to see you. And since we have a short group, I won't do this when other people join the call, but quickly, Cassandra, tell us who you are and who you're representing.
Hi, I'm with the LBC, okay, and I will be working on their grants going forward. And then we have our new director of development, okay, Ben Taylor, and I've relocated out of the Syracuse, New York area, but was a Santa Rosa native growing up. So
got it. So are you in Santa Rosa now, or is that what you said? Or are you?
Sonoma County. I live in Cloverdale, work in Santa Rosa, but perfect. Yes.
All right, that's great. Thank you. I think, I'm not sure if all the rest of you know each other, but thank you for doing that as the newcomer. If the rest of you would care to put your name in the chat and your organization in the chat or on your screen so people can know who you're representing, that would be great. And while you're doing that, I want to take this moment to do an acknowledgement that we are coming to you from Sonoma County, which is the traditional ancestral land of the Wapo, Pomo, and Coast Miwok Native tribes. And we are happy to be on their land. That sounded weird, but we are acknowledging that we are coming to you from their land. So I think I'm going to go forward now and let you know that it's me today doing this session and not Sam. And that is sad for you all because Sam is so great at this and so hands-on in this. She is out sick and was very busy this morning and not able to do it. So I am sorry that you're getting the backup. But we have enlisted Bernadette, who is very active in this process, and also the Creative Sonoma blank screen is Debbie Yarrow, working in the background to make sure that we make things right and answer as many questions as we can without Sam, the person who knows most about this. If there are questions we don't have answers to, we will just take note of those and get answers and send them out to all of you after this is over. So with no further ado, I'll tell you what we're going to do today and give you a sense of timing on it so that you can figure out how to adjust your schedules. We'll spend probably the first 20 minutes, maybe a little longer, talking about the overall guidelines, what's different about these from any other guidelines that we have gone through, and some of the specific key things to always be thinking about and looking about in these guidelines and in general in terms of writing grants, and then answer any questions that you might have about that broadly. And then we'll transition over after, like I say, about 30 minutes, I hope, over to a line-by-line review of the actual application form for any of you who haven't been through it or who want a refresher as to what's being asked there. You are all free to obviously sign out anytime you want to not be part of that. Just take take what you need from this and move on as you need. And as a reminder, because we have some newcomers on the call, we are recording this session and we'll post it on the website. So just want to make sure you're all comfortable with that. Okay. Is there anyone on this call who has not applied for a grant to Creative Sonoma before? You can either raise your hand if we can see you or put your hand in the, your hand in the reaction section. Okay, good. So most of you have been through this before. That's great. A couple of you newcomers. Try to manage getting information to all sides of this equation, newcomers and veterans. Because our goal in doing this is we want everybody to write and submit a compelling and fundable grant application where we want everyone to do well in this, both when you're coming to us and when you're going to other sources. All right, so digging straight into it, I want to talk about this particular grant program and what's different from applications you might have seen from us or written from us in the past. And the first way to do that is also one of the best things to do when you're writing a grant application is make sure and read the whole thing really carefully. And in particular, in this case, look at the overview or if other grant makers are talking about their philosophy or what the grant is about, because those are your clues for what really matters in getting a successful application in this time and what matters to the grant making organization. So there's a couple sentences in our overview that I want to draw your attention to because they are sort of the umbrella for why anything that has changed has changed. The first one is that we talk about that we are hoping to fund projects that demonstrate the power of the arts to contribute to the social cohesion of our communities. And that's something I think you'll start to hear language like that from Creative Sonoma going forward. We've been saying that for a while, but we will say it going forward. We feel like our job is to help everybody in this community recognize and value how powerful the arts are as a tool and partner in our community well-being. You know, we feel like lots of people that aren't involved in the arts kind of like to push us off to the side or think about us as an afterthought. And we want to make us all more central to everybody's thinking that are influencers and decision makers, et cetera. And so you'll hear that language from us on a regular basis talking about it. hopefully when we get to the point of having money to give out and make that a priority, we have written it in such a way that you can do what you already do. We're not asking you to do something different, but help think about it and show us how what it is that you do helps achieve that goal of making a difference and an impact in the community. So that's one that I wanted to make sure you all saw that sentence and understand that. Also, this is not necessarily a new sentence, but it's in there and is important, which is the sentence that says, all applications will be reviewed with a lens of the commitment to providing equitable access and participation. Again, was something we've been talking about for a long time at Creative Sonoma. We know many of you have been leading the charge in trying to become really, truly equitable, thoughtful, diverse organizations. That matters. So that will be one of the criteria that all of these grants will be reviewed by. And then the third sentence I want to draw attention to, again, this isn't really new, but it's important, which is for all projects, you're going to have to make the case as to how you will track participants and demonstrate your impact and reach. And that's just critical to grant writing. We want to know how you will do the things you say you're going to do, not just that you'll do them and we'll all assume that yes, impact was had. Yes, audiences were reached. So think that through carefully, because those are three things from the very beginning overview that kind of point you in the direction of what's different. But now to the specifics of what is really different in this one, you'll see that we have talked about, and then I'm going to start with the geographic impact focus. That's new for us. We grapple all the time with how different the organizations are that come to us for applications. And so we have major multi-million-dollar organizations, and we have fledgling kind of startup, if you will, organizations or nearly all volunteer organizations coming. And it's really hard to have them all in the same pool being evaluated at the same time against each other. And so this is a little bit of an effort to try to give people a lane to choose to go down so that you can tell us, what do you think is most important about what you're doing? And so that, because you might not have 50 staff people, or you might only have one staff person, or this is a way for you to identify how can you tell us what is the impact that you're making. And it just felt right to say, let's talk about how big your impact is geographically, because we know some of the impact might seem small geographically, but the depth of the impact is really important. So that's what we're attempting to do there, is to help the evaluation process fit the fact that we have people coming with really different aims in terms of what they want to achieve. And that's so impact and geography. A note to you all that may be self-explanatory, but we think about geography based on the supervisor's districts. That's because we are a county agency and we have to report out to the supervisors about where we are showing impact through our grant funds and what you all are doing. This is all county money coming into this program. That's what they care about. That's what we want to report back. And so that's why we use that as our kind of geographic boundary. So as you can see, there's three kinds of impacts you can talk about in your grant application, county-wide, essentially, which is meaning that your activities are going to serve at least 3 districts or more, right? So you're going wide, and people are coming from all over to your activities, or you are taking your activities all over. Then there's neighborhood impact, which is anything smaller than that. So 2 districts or less, but it could even be sort of a little micro neighborhood. You may really be feeling like you're going to work on a particular couple of block radius to try to change the way the arts are seen and the neighborhood feels about itself because of an art project in a small space. And then students, which is separate again. Many of you do a lot of activities, but you really want to focus this grant on the work that you do with TK-12 students. And this is whether in school or out of school settings. So whichever you want to do that feels right to you, pick one of those lanes and make your case for the impact that you're making in those areas. I'm seeing questions in the chat. Thank you. I meant to say, please put questions in the chat and I will. Jenny, if you could mute, that would be great. I think we're hearing some of your background noise. That'd be great. Thank you. Karen, we're going to do that line item, line by line. So I'm not looking at the application right now, so I'll come back to that question when we get to it. All right. And then the other difference is you saw that we are talking about an environmental emphasis. This goes back to the sort of community cohesion and collaborations to recognize this is one specific area in which we know many of our artists and many arts organizations have been thinking for a long time, but certainly with more energy and impetus since 2017 and the wildfires. And so we wanted to recognize that that is an area that art might have a really unique way to help our community understand and think about what the issues are around the environment and the environmental challenges that we're all facing today. Many folks have been doing this kind of work and have put that together since the fires. This is sort of recognizing that, but also encouraging folks that if that's something you are interested in doing, we'd love to see it. Now's a good time to think about that and put that into your project if it fits what you're doing. We're not saying this isn't a grant for environmental impact. You can apply with none of that in your application, and that is not a problem. We just want to kind of call it out as something that we know that's a particular area. If you are interested and need help thinking about partners that you might want to work with or folks that can inform your programs, please talk to us directly, and we can certainly let you know folks that we know are interested in pairing up with artists to do this kind of work. I actually just got an email this morning from the new executive director of the Stewards of the Redwoods saying, hey, Armstrong Forest has an incredible amphitheater in the forest, and maybe a really wonderful art project that might get done with this grant could happen in that location if it's a performing arts event. So that kind of conversation we would be happy to try to facilitate and broker. I'm going to keep going for 1 minute and then and stop and open it up for questions. I would just move through the guidelines now into the, if I were writing this grant myself, I would be looking at that overview first and the specifics, but then the next thing I really spend a lot of time looking at is what is the evaluation criteria? So what is this application going to be judged on? That should look very similar to what it has in the past. Always we're looking at artistic excellence and merit. So tell us about the value of the project, impact, which we've asked for before, but now is critical to the application a little bit more. Equitable access and participation, again, that's not new. Your capacity to do this, get it done, and the way you show us that based on how you write this application, and the completeness and clarity, we can understand what it is you want to do, and you haven't left out significant, there aren't gaps in our understanding of what it is that you want to have happen. And then the optional environmental sustainability impact, if that's there. Yeah, I'm going to stop right there and ask if there are any questions, and then I'll go through a couple of more tips. Oh, no, let me give one other specific thing. The total pool of dollars that we have for this program is $150,000. That is less than we have had in many years. Partly that's because the last time we were out giving regular grants and not COVID-related grants, we had 150 from the supervisors, but also 300,000 that they had formally given to you all directly as you applied through their community impact grants, and then they gave it to us on a one-year basis from a separate pool of funds, but gave it to us for that. That 1 year passed, we were on the track to be asking them to make that permanent, and COVID hit. And so all things went away in that regard. So I think that we will all be having conversations over hopefully the next 6 months to a year to go back and say, all right, we've been shrunk and we need to build back and see what we can do to try to claw some of that money back. At the moment, though, we're stuck with the 150. We've been supplementing that, some of you know, over the years with COVID relief from federal sources. So that's been helpful to actually have dollars in your pockets. But now we're in a year where we don't have that. We have just the 150. I will tell you, we have one more grant application to the NEA that we'll hear about at the end of November. We've had a good run with NEA grants. I'm expecting that means the odds are against us. That's how I feel like with grant writing is that, you can't bet 1,000, but you will be the first to know if we get one more round of COVID funding from the NEA, that we'll make that available for you all as well. So 150,000, and as you saw in the guidelines, you can apply for up to $10,000. And as I mentioned, these are all Sonoma County funds coming straight from the county coffers to us and not supplemented with any other sources. So that said, does anyone have any questions on the guidelines themselves? And let's see, I don't know if it's question 29, so I'm not going to answer that, but we can pull up the guidelines and look at that. So Marge, what would you like to add?
Hi, Kristen. I know that this is in the guidelines someplace, but when does the money need to be spent? Is it by June 22?
No, I think we've extended it. I'm glad you're asking that. No, it's December 2022.
Oh, great. Okay.
So these are for January through December. So to give you a little more time to plan and think about what you might want to do.
That's great.
So just to go over that, obviously the deadline is December 2nd. We'll announce the awards, we hope by mid-December. and then you have a year essentially to spend the funds. Another piece, again, this is for some of the newcomers. I keep saying we, as though we're making the decisions on the grants. Creative Sonoma staff does not decide these grants. We look at your applications and make sure they're complete and eligible, but then we use peer reviewers. This is written up in the guidelines as well. We use peer reviewers when we can. We bring them in from out of county via Zoom or otherwise to avoid any conflicts of interest. So we're looking for people that have experience in either running nonprofit arts organizations, doing arts programming, doing arts funding, et cetera. So they have a sense of what this is about, but they're not here and therefore don't have any allegiances or alliances to any particular grantee in the pool. So that'll be important for you as you write your grant to remember that it's not people who know you or your background or your organization. And so you need to write to strangers. So make sure that they, it's that fine balance between being James Michener and writing your application as though you were beginning in the Mesozoic era and coming forward to being concise and clear and what do people really need to know. So just, be cautious and careful about making sure that you've written what needs to be written in order for people to understand it. The best way to know that is to give your application to a stranger to your programs to read it and follow whatever questions they ask that they didn't understand from what you had written. Let's see, from Maya Kamas, no fundraising event galas. Would we fund expansion of a program event that has had a modest gain in the past but needs to expand and improve in this day and age? If the focus of the program event is fundraising, then that's a no. If it's about growing a program and the program has some level of funding sources to keep the program going, then we can fund that. But we won't fund something that's designed as a fundraising event. Does that make sense? Am I answering it?
Yes.
Great.
Thank you.
Sure. Anybody else have any questions right now about the guidelines? All right, then a couple of quick things before we pivot and go over to the actual application itself. These are so basic and all of you know them, but I'm gonna say them out loud because Sam always says this, I say this, we're in the same pool you are on a regular basis also. We are also applying for grants to get the funding to do the work that we're doing here. We can all learn together. We never, it's like there's never the one right answer, right? There's plenty of things to do all the time. And even if you do everything that everyone says you should do, there's no guarantee you're going to get the grant because the competition always is fierce. And so there you have it. So that said, the key things we always talk about are make sure you answer all the questions. Should go without saying, but please answer all the questions and make sure you answer them completely. Make sure you proof your work, or as I had said before, get an outside eye on what it is that you're doing. So someone who can look at it and tell you, I don't quite understand what you mean by this. Know that Creative Sonoma does not have a hidden agenda. We're not trying to trick you with our questions. If our questions don't make sense, that's our fault. We've written something in a confusing way. Please ask us. Please say, I don't know what you mean. And you'll have the chance to do that when we go through the line by line. But if you aren't listening or if you've signed off or whatever, and you have a question later when you start to try to answer it, just ask us and we'll try to help you as best as we can. Without writing your answer for you, we'll try to answer and be as clear as we can. So we're not trying to, say, well, what we can't say out loud, but what we really mean is, that's part of why I went through that overview at the beginning. That's where we really talk about our general philosophy. And then these specific questions, we hope, will elicit your ability to tell us about what you're doing that fits in that philosophy. Told you about the peer reviewers. We have 3 handouts that we've given. Many of you have had them already, but we'll send them out to everybody on the call afterwards, which are just general about grant writing, mostly from the, I forgot who they're from, but there's one that's top 10 grant writing tips, which is really great. The key thing I'll remind you of is give yourself adequate time. The fact that you're on this call is a good indicator that you're thinking about this in advance, but make sure, it just always takes longer than you think it will. Write clearly and directly and get feedback. Those are 3 of the 10 tips that are on this list, but there's more to it. And we also have something to talk to you about getting your letters of recommendation. When you do letters of support, something that we see a lot that we can't really express, please don't do high enough, is don't have someone who either is a relative. Don't have your mom send a note saying, you know, oh, my daughter is wonderful and you should give her this money. Don't have someone who stands to benefit from the grant writing the application. And if it's a partner, you know, who's working on it, that's great. But it's a little weird if a letter comes from someone saying, this grant will allow me to be hired to do X, Y, Z, right? There's a little bit of a friction for a reviewer saying, yeah, well, of course they're going to write a letter of recommendation. We assume that the person that you're going to hire that you put in your application supports the project, right? Don't waste the time having a letter of recommendation from someone that we know will support the project. Give us someone that surprises us or that speaks to you as an organization differently or to your capacity differently, that's an outsider to it, that isn't necessarily able to be within the confines of the grant application context itself. Every attachment that you get to make is another place to do the thing that you're doing in a grant application, which is you are trying to perfect the art of persuasion, right? You're trying to persuade someone to do something. So use every space that you're given to move you forward one more notch on that. Don't try not to be redundant. So we'll send you that, which is about the letters of reference and gives you some good examples of what to do and not to do. And then also a document that talks about choosing your work samples. What you get to submit, again, this is the most telling thing about what's the artistic quality of what you're doing. What is the audience response? Because sometimes those photographs that you send or videos that you send really can show whether the community is engaged in what you're doing or really not. So choose those samples really carefully. Again, recognizing these are this is your chance to shine in front of strangers that don't know you. Don't make the assumption that they understand what's going on. Make sure you're clear in describing as you get the chance to what it is. If you're submitting a video and you have the ability, either mark where you want the viewer to start watching it, or even just edit it if you can to the part that you want the viewer to see. Don't make a viewer who's looking at, you know, we'll get between 20 and 40 applications and you'll each have 6 work samples. So multiply that and think that every reviewer is looking at all of that. So don't make it hard for the viewer. Remove the friction. Don't make them watch, you know, if the first 2 minutes of your video are introduction and setup, no, get to the punch right away. Get them to see what you want them to see right at the get-go so that they are engaged right away. So those kinds of tips are in the 3 documents that we'll send you to use as guides that we have found helpful in going through that. All right. Anybody, any other questions? Go ahead, Marge.
You can always count on me for asking a lot of questions. The creative portfolio work samples. So would, in our case, you know, we have a season of performances that we present. Would it be helpful for us to identify the artists that are examples of those that we will be presenting, or would it be helpful for us to show like stuff that we have done in the past, like video from our actual performances in the hall?
That's a really excellent question. And I'm just going to brainstorm out loud with you. I think that people love to see past work as an example of what current work would be. So like I think that a reviewer does not need to see necessarily a video of John Smith, who is someone you've booked for 2023, because I think you'll put the name down, people could look it up to see if that's good, but I think seeing someone quality in the space that you've used before that you feel like is comparable, in your case, is probably good.
Okay, we have some things like thank you videos that we share with donors that talk about the impact that we have in the community. Would that be something that would be useful?
How compelling is it? Would be my question to you.
Okay.
We have that same, conversation about, gosh, we've got a cute video that kind of talks about who we are. Is that fun to include? Well, maybe, but again, thinking about what does it share that you haven't shared in the application that matters to you? So if you're trying to show your personality as an organization, or, that's good. Or if there's something that's, if you're going to bring someone to tears, always good.
We like to bring people to tears.
Yeah. We do too. This is what the arts do. We make people cry. Yeah, no, that's not a very good tagline. But thinking about, that bit that's really going to say, oh, we get a flavor of this organization that we might not have seen otherwise. If you feel like you've hit on the artistic, front what you need to, if you're really, so what else do you need to show that maybe video or photos can show that you can't really describe in words clearly enough?
Great.
Yeah. Who else? Anybody else?
Oh, I had a quick question, but I was going to put it in the chat, but I'll just ask it. Karen,
Okay.
here. Hi.
Yep. Hi.
So when you were talking about the guidelines, Kristen, you mentioned, sort of equity and access. And I think your wording says equitable access and participation. When we're structuring these projects, and again, in your example, you use sort of an overall, performing, sort of gamut as one of your examples too. Is there going to be a favorite, view for things that are either no charge or low charge or have kind of a subsidy, if in fact that can be demonstrated that is making an impact as far as access? Is there any sort of overall sense of free versus paid programming having any benefit?
So I'm going to answer it generally and then specifically and hopefully get to what you're asking for. So generally we do not want to tell arts organizations that they need to do everything for free, period. You can't, that's not what you are designed to do. Pivot to, is what you're doing open to and inviting and embracing and engaging of all residents of the community or people in the community that we're specifically targeting that may not be normally participating? That may require you to talk to us about, well, what is the fee for participation, and is that a barrier? And do you have the ability to get around that barrier by not charging? I think, if I'm getting at what you're asking about, I think the other critical piece to think about, and that's why we put this in there, is access and participation is something that, a phrase that Sam has used a lot, which is, we want to program with the communities that we're trying to serve and not program on them. We don't need to think of, oh, this is a great idea, we're gonna give it to you. Look at us coming in and laying this down on top of you, right? It's about, so who was engaged in the process, and did you talk about what people might be able to afford and not afford? And was there a way to engage people that maybe couldn't afford what it is that you're talking about, or that needed encouragement because they had never set foot in a facility like LBC before, or like the Museum of Sonoma County before? And so what are the elements of that you're going after in this project to try to take those steps to be equitable for access? Is that helping?
So that helps. So I would just interpret that as, if we're asking for the $10,000 for, fee-based programs, that in order to really address access, there should be some discussion in the narrative about how that is not a barrier, or how that barrier is being looked at. Don't ignore that.
Yeah, do not ignore that.
Okay, thank you.
Also, good tip for all grant writing: don't ever ignore one of the criteria. I mean, you didn't mean that, Karen, but don't ignore the criteria that are there and assume that, because people will assume you're not doing anything.
Well, right. But I mean, there's nowhere in your application that you're saying, is this fee-based or is this not fee-based? So honestly, I'm not criticizing you guys at all, but the actual element where you're asking around diversity and access is not really super specific in your application, other than if in your impact section, right? I mean, it's up in your criteria, which is great, but I'm just sort of saying to everybody and to myself that, it is an issue, how access and participation really is happening on the ground. So,
and Karen, I think you would have room to talk about that in the budget.
Good point. That's a good point on a budget narrative. That's true. Yep. One could address that. Yep. Good idea.
Yep. Who else has another question? All right. Well, in that case, then I think what we're going to do is pull up the actual application as you see it and walk through that. I'll try to go through relatively expeditious, but in this one, please raise your hands as we go for anything that we're, breezing over that I didn't explain well or that you needed more information of. So Bernadette is going to put the share screen here. And by the way, does anybody need us to does everyone know where all this information is online? We can put in the chat the website page, but I'm assuming most of you have already gotten there in order to be at this place with us. All right, so give us 2 minutes and we'll pull it up. All right, so you'll get here and you'll click apply, and here comes the application. And I'll just ask you to scroll through. This front page is just details about, you know, address, zip, et cetera. So let's go to the address and move forward. This first part is easy, although I will stop you at one point to be clear on something. All right, so go ahead. All right, so here's where we're really clear with you all about if you're a 501c3 with 51% or more of your arts and culture as your mission, or if you are a culturally specific organization. If you click the button that says not a 501c3, Bernadette, if you'll click that, you'll see you get a message that says, we're so sorry, you are not eligible to apply. All right, so then have you received a grant in the past? Bernadette, again, click yes. And what you'll see there is you can click. We've tried to make it easy for you and listed any possibility. You can just click those that you have received in the past. All right, now this stuff is again pretty basic. What's your organization's name and your address? This helps us identify that you're in Sonoma County and the mailing address. And if you have a website, obviously, because our reviewers, I remember when websites first were showing up on applications, and lots of reviewers were like, well, should we look at websites or should we not? Or they weren't even on the application. Now there's hardly a panel I go through that people haven't taken the time to look at other people's website, even if it wasn't specified in the application. So website is important. If you have a Creative Sonoma profile page, we want you to put that link here as well. And then now here gets the one thing that gets a little tricky, not tricky, but for us, it gets tricky. Obviously, we want the director's name and email address and phone number. And then we want, scroll down, please, the project lead, if that's someone other than the ED, great. So the person who's going to be responsible and whose resume we'll be looking for when we get to the creative portfolio. But scroll down one more time. Okay, this is really important to point out to you all, and some of you have bumped into this. In addition to the user account email, that's the person who is completing this application, who might not be either the ED or the project lead. So some of you on this call are grant writers, or some of you are, you know, maybe as a staff person or an outside grant writer, whatever. You're the person who's filling this out. You're the person who's going to be communicated with about this grant, unless you click here, the other people that should receive all the information. This is really critical because, you know, we'll have communications going out saying here's something that's important about your grant, and no one in the organization is getting it because an outside grant writer forgot to click here. We didn't even have this on an early organization. So please make sure whoever's filling this out that you look at that and make sure who needs to get this information. Okay, scrolling down. So this is really high level organizational information. What is your fiscal year? Plug that in, and then plug in your most recently completed, what were your total revenues and your total expenses. And if there was a deficit or surplus, it will automatically calculate there. If you had a deficit, please fill out number 14. Arts organizations have deficits. That is not all by itself a horrible thing. We expect that to occur. It just happens, especially given what we've all been going through in these last couple of years. There are reasons that arts organizations, that all organizations do, but that we want you to explain to us what's happened. Was this a catastrophic event? Was this something that was planned because you were using reserve funds? Is this, you know, what were the reasons for the deficit and any activity that you've taken to resolve them if there is a challenge there? That's your chance to say, yep, we're like every other arts organization. It's hard, times are fluid, and here's what we did about it. So please don't forget that if you have a deficit. And then what year were you established? 16 is your mission and vision statements. Please add those in. Here is, I think this is relatively new, but do you intentionally serve any of these populations? We talked about a little of this when we were doing the COVID stuff, I know. If you click one of these, we'll ask you to briefly describe the program or service that actually serves those people. It could be a program name. It could be that simple if it's explanatory. It could be some other service that you offer, but you can be brief there to describe what is it specifically that you're doing to serve that particular population, if any. And if not, you can say none of the above.
Kristen?
Yeah.
This is something I am always unsure about. We have, you know, a diversity of artist experiences that happen here, and different audiences for the artists that come. There are engagements with artists that are targeted to specific groups. For example, we will convene our Black students on campus, or we will convene our LGBTQIA students or people outside the community. In those instances, it's a one-off with an artist having a conversation. Those are things that we would want to mention on the application. Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So absolutely, you can just describe that. When a season is selected, and if that's part of your selection process of the artist is thinking about that. So you want to talk about that and then give examples of it. And here's how we then extend that to that community.
Great. Thank you.
Yep. 18 for the supervisorial district. And you can see on the right, that link will take you straight to a lookup. You can put your address in there and it will tell you what district you're in, which, by the way, everybody get ready because this is all going to go crazy when we have new districts. So we were all thinking about all the remapping that's going to have to be done and all the automatic processes that people have put in place for our existing districts are now going to shift whenever that gets finalized. So, but for now, it's as was, and you can look it up and put in the district where you're located. And then on question 19, click all the boxes of the districts in which you think your programs will occur and or audiences will be drawn from. I said something there just now. Let me, if Sam were here, I think she would have answered that question a little bit differently. Bernadette, can you make a note for me to clarify with Sam on that question 19, if it's just where projects will occur? I said also where audiences are drawn from. And those are two different things. And we have tracked them separately sometimes. And so, yeah, okay. I'll email that out to everybody because that needs to be clarified.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, now on your project, give your project a name, please, so that it can be referred to easily. And then 21 is important because the one or two sentences that you write in here are what we hope to be able to use to describe your program to the peer reviewers, because we always do a little synopsis first to them in the review process. I was trying to think how to describe this today. Think about if the Press Democrat was covering this project, what would be the two sentences that would best tell all the readers of the Press Democrat what this project is? So please be clear and specific and, not a really long thing. This is really about the two sentences. This is the elevator description of what the project is. That can be literally, we could pick it up and put it verbatim into another document. All right, grant amount up to $10,000. You should make that choice as to what you're going to ask for. And then here is where you talk about what lane your application should go into, either youth, neighborhood, or county-wide.
I have a quick question on this one. So, and not to be difficult, what does it really mean when you're saying under youth impact? If the product produced primarily or entirely for youth, the youth element overrides the county-wide or neighborhood impact. I think I understand, but what does override really mean in this context?
In terms of making a choice. So if your project is predominantly youth oriented, that's what you should check. That overrides you checking that there might also be neighborhood impact and countywide impact of this youth program. But if it is predominantly serving youth, that's what you should check.
Okay, I get it. But doesn't mean you shouldn't also be addressing the other two. You're just going to put your majority of your emphasis into youth. And that's, if it is a majority youth program, boom, you're going to get that one regardless of the other two. Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Does this project address environmental sustainability? Blah, blah, blah. Yes or no. And I think that's just a yes or no button. Bernadette, click yes. I don't think there's a sub box under that, right? It's just a yes or no. Oh, right. There's not a sub box, but I'm glad we did this. Please describe in the narrative your environmental impact. So we don't want this to be a pull out separate whole other thing you're writing about. If it is something that you're doing, it should fit into what you're talking about in the broad narrative anyway of what you're doing. So but that's just a reminder, put it into the main narrative.
And Kristen, in this instance for us, we've got a couple of programs that we're doing as part of the season that address climate change, but it's not like the overall driver of the whole season.
I think go ahead and put that in there.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Okay. The narrative, obviously, that's the most important piece of this to really give us a sense of what it is you're going to do and how you're going to do it. Those questions, those are prompts A through E to make sure that you're thinking about all of those things and cover all of those in your narrative. Does someone else have a question on that?
It was me, but I see the answer to it, so never mind.
Okay, great. Yay. 26 is for you to talk about the underserved populations, if those are targeted that you're trying to serve, and then describe your efforts to get them engaged and participating. And again, I would take that if you are being able to and have thought through involving them from the get-go and the planning, make sure to include that. If it's, if it's not that in depth, whatever it is that you can describe that you're doing to try to bring that population in. And then how are you going to track that? Oops. 27, how are you going to track and evaluate whether you achieved that impact? So please talk to us about that. And this is, I will admit, this is one of the, sometimes the hardest things I answer in applications that we're trying to write. And part of it is none of us have all of the billions of dollars to hire evaluators and track, our impact. And a lot of the impact of arts is impact that probably should be measured longitudinally over 5 years and look at trends, because it's really hard. The famous question that we always ask is, how do you measure joy? Right? That's what the arts are bringing. So I get that this is hard. So what I will offer to you all as you're trying to do that is help us understand your thought process in how you try to figure out, did we achieve our objectives? Did we get what we wanted to get done here? Some of that, of course, can be quantitative. It can be, we wanted to increase our numbers by 100%, or we wanted to make sure that, we had 50% people of color participating in the program. But it can also be, we hope that there are, I'm making this up, don't take this word for word, but we want there to be 5 stories coming out of this event where people can describe to us how their lives were changed, and here they are, kind of a thing. That's a little loose what I just said, but I think that understanding that sometimes our impact is better told by stories and narrative, I think that's true. So how might you grab that and encapsulate that into a way that is actually measurable and tangible, and you can talk about it in a way that people will understand and say, yep, this program was worth it. Or it didn't do those things, and here's what we learned as a result of that. What will you, and maybe that's a way to think about it too when you're doing the evaluation, is what do you want to learn from evaluating the program? What will you do differently based on what you learned from doing the program? So I think we always think about, what we want is to be able to say, yay, it worked. We did it. Congratulations to all of us. But really, you want to evaluate so that what are you going to do going forward? So maybe if you keep that in front of mind about what you will do with the knowledge, that might help you think about how and what you measure. Okay, the project lead, again, that's the person who's working on it. A brief description, knowing that you're going to submit a resume on this. So you can just give us the basics in terms of how it really, again, this is one of those places to don't throw it away. Use this to really describe why that person is specifically suited to do this work. If that helps you tell your story better, talk about who your organization is and how you made those choices, if that's what it is, to have that person do it. If there's something there that helps you give more about why you guys are thoughtful and qualified in doing this work, throw it in there. And that leads actually to the last question, which we always have in here, which is my favorite question. Some of you guys hit this one out of the park in past years. Sometimes it's like, I'm exhausted, I have nothing else to say, which we totally also understand. This is our opportunity to say, free flow. We know there are things about your organization that you really wanted to share that didn't sit somewhere else in the narrative, or there's something that we didn't ask about because we didn't care about it or didn't know to ask about it. Put that in there, help us know what there is about you or your organization or your project that didn't show up in the other questions that we asked. Okay, anybody else stop there? Any questions on that? All right, we're getting into the specifics. Demographics, what everybody loves. We know this is hard also, but please note we have in all caps projected demographics. So we know these are going to be estimates, but we also know that many of you are thinking about this, and some of those are going to be easy to answer. If you're doing a total student program, then you're going to have 100% youth 18 and under. That's great. So Some of them are less difficult than others to manage. Whatever you put in there, make sure you have the ability to defend those numbers and how you came to that projection. That doesn't mean that you have actuals, but you might say, we know that we serve the exact demographics of Sonoma County, which is 52% female, 48% male. I made that up. But so here's what we're trying to figure out. Just think to yourself, how do you want to defend that if someone will come back to say to you, how did you choose that? Whatever that is, put those in. But they are your projected numbers. Give it your best estimate as what that's going to be. Okay. Same with race and ethnicity. Some of you, I think, are actually getting really good at this, or I should say, are getting really specific about how you're tracking this, which I know it also feels really weird to do, and it sometimes feels like antithetical to what we're trying to do, which is be community and not have barriers. But I do feel like this is an important thing to look at when we are really trying to make conscious change in order to ensure that we, our audiences, our programs, our planners, our staff, everybody look more like our community looks. So that's in there to make everybody think about it and to really be conscious and thoughtful about what do we think we can do and what do we think that will help our audiences look like and be. Budget. Okay, so the budget looks very much like it has always looked. I don't know if there's any change in this actually. I think it should be pretty much the same. So you'll put in the total amount that you're asking for in line 1. And then if you have other grants that are either committed or projected, you'll put that total in line 2. Corporate sponsors and partners, same thing in line 3. And this is for projected or committed. I'll get to how you help us know that when we get down to the bottom. If there are fundraising events and activities whose revenues will be used for this project, put those in there. If the event has a fee or earned income, ticket sales, et cetera, or concessions or anything else you're going to add to this, put that in here. And then individual donations you may be using for this project, and the grab bag of other revenues, anything that we didn't ask for specifically, totals up into number 8. And then your total, that should automatically calculate your total revenues. And then the expenses, this is where you get to show us what it costs to do this work, and you can put in if there are artistic personnel, what percentage, if not all, of their time is going to be paid for out of this grant. And you get to put in administrative personnel. So this is where you get to say my time, my grant writing time, my administrative time, my whatever time I'm doing towards this project. I shouldn't say grant writing because that's prior to the funding period, but from January through December on this project, what are the administrative personnel costs that you want to add into it? And these are actual cash out costs. We'll talk about it in a minute. What are the materials and supplies? Again, a total there. We want to remind everybody that and recognize that there are costs that are just a drag, but that have to be paid, and that's legal and insurance and licenses that might be required for this, or a percentage of those that you will apply towards this project. Marketing costs, general office expenses, and then other expenses. And then that will total up in that 0 line. And the revenues and expense balance should automatically total as well. All right, so now 32 is really important. Any item above that has an asterisk by it means that it's required to have an explanation in this area. Not every item does, but if it's got an asterisk, it must have that explanation. If none of them, if you didn't put anything in there that fits this, then you can put not applicable in the field. But this is where you get to do, Karen, what you were talking about, saying this is a fee. We will have fees for this program, but there will be scholarships, that are going out for folks, kind of a thing to talk about what your revenues and your expenses are related to that. So this, in the revenues it describes, please put in if you put $10,000 in grants from 2 different sources, please put in if they're confirmed or if they are projected. Same with sponsors and corporate. The earned income obviously is projected for what you would be getting from that and other revenues. And then keep scrolling through expenses. What portion of the artistic and administrative personnel is going to go to this project? Marketing, only if the dollar figure for marketing is over $1,000 do you need to describe what goes in there, and same with general office. And in these cases, we do ask for the hourly project rates of pay. In general, I'll tell you what we find with our peer reviewers is they're surprised when they see that those numbers seem too low. People aren't aren't, unless something is really egregiously too high, people are more concerned about the fact that the artistic personnel are not getting paid enough, or the administrative people are not paying themselves enough. So, you know, be candid and be thoughtful and be realistic, and know that the people that are reviewing this are pretty good at looking at budgets and knowing what things cost. So then 33 is, if you have any in-kind contributions that you want to talk about, please add them in here. Don't make them part of the budget. And there are examples of how to calculate what you might have there. This is not a required field, but it is a field where you might be able to show off again a little bit about how many volunteers you normally have working at your event, and that it takes, or how many folks are donating goods and services to you, so that you give this sense of showing you are an organization that is grounded in getting this project done and getting it, you know, it shows your capacity, if you will, that other criteria that we have in the grant evaluation. What is your capacity to do the project? Well, we've got great relationships, and here's how we can show that off to you. Any questions on the budget? All right, we are coming up on the hour mark. The creative portfolio, I think this is the last thing. So a total of 6 items that show your creative and artistic excellence that are relevant to the project are required. Don't upload more than 1 item per file. Make sure, and this is really the critical point to add here, make sure each file has a really descriptive title so that the peer reviewer knows what they are looking at. Don't make us guess. Don't make people guess what it is that they're looking at. And especially if you can, how does it relate to the project that you are applying for? And then there are the specs there about what the maximum sizes are, or the type of file to upload. It's pretty wide open with this program submittable that we use. And I think that's pretty explanatory. Does anyone have any questions about the creative portfolio? Okay. Resume of the project lead, which we've talked about. And then we show you your checklist of things that you can look at just as your final double check before you hit send. We didn't talk about, if there's anyone on the call who is going to be applying for an organization that has never applied before, those are the only folks that have to submit their IRS tax exempt letter and their bylaws, because the rest of the organizations that have previously applied, we have those for you, and we don't need you to just keep submitting them over and over again. And I think we are at the end and scene. Questions, comments, anybody else? Is your stomach grumbling for lunch calling you louder than any questions you might possibly have? And because you know that the default is, if there's anything that you forgot to ask or are too exhausted to ask, please send emails to me, to Sam, or to Bernadette. I will tell you, Samantha is your best bet at getting you a direct answer. And Samantha is samantha.kimple@sonoma-county.org. I believe that's also on all over the guidelines, and it's all over the website, and her name is all over the website. And we can type it into the chat right here.
I had a quick question. My name is Dominique Peterson. I'm from Corazon Healdsburg, and I thought I had heard at some point, we have not applied before, so that's what I'm asking. I thought I had heard at some point, because I made note of it, that we needed a letter or letters of support, but then I'm looking back through everything and I didn't see that. Is that not true? Sorry for the confusion.
No, I am sorry for confusing you. I did say that about letters of support, and it does not look like we're asking for letters of support for this project.
Okay. Well, I'm glad I asked, because I was looking back online and I didn't see anything. I was like, wait, where did I miss it?
Hey, please don't tell Sam that I did that.
It's okay. Well,
that's like the classic. Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you. I'm so glad you saw that. I didn't even think about that. So yes, okay. But now you know how to do a letter of support in case you need for another organization. Anybody else? Anything else that I mangled for your understanding? All right. Well, you know how to find us. We are looking forward to applications from all of you to help make this, help you guys thrive and do the amazing work that you all do in the community, and hopefully help us collectively make this place a really great place to be through the arts. So hang in there and just send us any questions you've got. All right, enjoy your lunch. Thanks, everybody.